Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the bubble economy happening here in the United States. And I think many people have grown frustrated in the government's ability to provide people and businesses with a predictable amount of inflation every single year. Now, looking at some of the recent data over the last few years, we've really strained away from the Federal Reserve's target of about 2% inflation each year. In recent years, we've seen a much higher uptick in inflation, right? In the early 2020s, we saw about 4% inflation year over year in conjunction with higher interest rates. Now, what the Federal Reserve has done here is sort of put the government in a pickle, where the Federal Reserve's goal is to maximize employment and keep inflation low, but it really doesn't appear that they can have the best of both worlds. With the government debt, the national debt, I think hovering close to about $37 trillion, and the United States paying about a little over $1 trillion per year on interest on that debt, the higher interest rates that are now going into effect is really making it much more expensive for the government and ultimately the taxpayer to pay for as a whole. Now, if the Federal Reserve can't maintain these 2% inflationary targets while inflation continues to tick up, what do they do in terms of forecasting or making changes to interest rates going forward? And this is not a very healthy economy. As we've all seen in recent years, there's been a large trend in increased of asset prices like the stock market, increased prices in homes and whatnot. Essentially, any hard asset or assets that tend to hold their value over the years has gone up, whereas the incomes and the wages of the average person has been nowhere near to keeping up with those pressures. I think just over the last year or so, the S&P is up well over 20%, whereas wages are not, making it much more difficult for the average person to get ahead. Now, if we look at just the last 12 months in terms of how inflation has changed month over month, we see some really disturbing information in terms of to really just see if the Federal Reserve's strategy is working or not. And month over month, I mean, these small percent changes of, let's just say, 0.4% every single month, it doesn't feel like that much or that noticeable from one month to the next for the average person. But what people need to realize is that these numbers multiply by 12 months. So if you're averaging inflation of at just about 0.4% per month times 12 months, you're getting close to about a 5% inflationary level every single year. Now, many people also don't believe these numbers here. If you go to the grocery store, many people don't see that the prices of goods or services has actually been this low. Just looking here, right, these numbers, what it really dictates at the end of the day, when you look at these higher inflationary pressures, much higher than the Federal Reserve's target of 2%, in conjunction with those higher interest rates, it's not working. And meanwhile, the national debt continues to grow and the government is spending at an insane pace that is largely unsustainable. This really puts the average person in a very difficult place and forecasts more inflation to come in the future. So I think in recent years, the will of the people, right, it's really led to, I think, this new administration being Donald Trump and the Department of Government Efficiency being Doge to try to solve these issues for the people. But what we need to see here is that right now, we are in full-blown momentum in terms of the future getting worse for the prices of goods and services and wages not keeping up with the inflationary pressures going on. And I think we have a multi-trifecta effect going on when it comes to the items that can solve the inflation, right? We have increased government spending, a large government spending deficit of about $2 trillion, that in conjunction with a much less healthy workforce than what was going on back then, right? If we look here at the workforce participation rate of, say, in the year 2000 versus today, there's been a few percentage points decline in that workforce participation. Meanwhile, the government debt spending crisis is just getting worse. You throw all this in with decreased birth rates with women, and it really forecasts that the future is going to get more difficult and unsustainable. So what people need to realize here is how do they plan for the future accordingly, knowing this information? Because if the government doesn't balance its budget, this inflation problem is going to get worse. And the question is at what rate? Unless interest rates go to zero and the interest on the national debt can be financed at next to nothing, which doesn't seem likely, that problem's not going to go away anytime soon. Also, we need to make the government spending cuts in the trillions, meaning at least $1 to $2 trillion to balance the budget. So what are we going to cut to make this problem go away? And that's really the question that people need to ask themselves. And it's not going to be easy. Any government cuts made will cause people to be laid off or the people receiving fewer benefits. Maybe it's SNAP eligibility for lower income people to buy foods, goods, and services. If the government were to cut that, there would be a very large recession because people wouldn't be able to essentially survive and maintain themselves as things are today. So, how all this reshapes the economy, right? If we just look at housing, for example, just over the last few decades, the multiple of income needed to buy a house has been going up drastically relative to that of the median income, right? The multiple needed to buy a home is not sustainable anymore for the average person, and it's much more difficult per se. And this can largely be attributed to the increased expectation of inflation going forward, right? If people believe that that inflation, government spending, and asset prices will continue to rise faster and faster in the future, it puts a higher net present value on the price of homes today. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of other problems in the asset prices of homes, like the supply of building material costs, and land availability as well, and even population. But all this isn't just say like an excuse to give the Federal Reserve for failing at their job, right? Or the government in general, per se. All this is really just the root of a problem created a long time ago when the people started to give the government too much power and the government abusing that power at the end of the day. So, how does all this get solved and where does it all go from here? And I think in recent administrations, we've really just seen the can getting kicked down the road and life getting more difficult for the average person. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I think that this current administration, at the latest, right, we need to see change right now, needs to make drastic changes to government cuts, increased efficiency, and really needing to boost GDP relative to the national debt to make it easier to pay off the debt with taxpayer dollars. Now, the probability of that happening seems very low, as making those government cuts would very likely trigger a recession or even a catastrophic depression at the end of the day. So I hope that this video gave you guys some good food for thought. And if you enjoyed, please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I will see you guys on the next video. Bye-bye.